At the conclusion of Steven Universe's Garbage and Here's Why, I made this remark about the LGBT spectrum. This is applicable toward, well, really anybody who falls under the LGBT spectrum. Is it a spectrum? I'm gonna say it is, because this doesn't fit in a spoken dialogue very well, and this is a slur, and fuck that noise. This would, in any sane world, be the exact opposite of a controversial statement, but sadly we don't live in a sane world. We live in a shitty world, where this offensive slur is being pushed by a small number of people as an umbrella term for the entire LGBT community. This attitude is fucking gross, and here's why. The usage of the Q slur as an identifier is the subject of a lot of debate, usually centered around the term's origin and whether it's appropriate to use the term or not. Unfortunately, the debate itself splits into two separate camps, only one of which I hold a strong and passionate objection to. The first camp are people who choose to use the Q slur as a self-identifier because I don't really know why. Everyone seems to have different reasons for using it, but the general gist of it is that the dozens of other terms are not good enough for one reason or another. The other camp are the advocates for the adoption of the Q slur as an umbrella term for the entire LGBT community, arguing that the large and diverse pool of terminology is too specific and we need to make everything more broad and all-encompassing. We can talk about those fucking jackasses in a moment. The central argument to both of these people is that the Q slur wasn't originally a slur and was originally a term used proudly by the LGBT community back during the era of the Stonewall riots before it was co-opted into a slur by straight people to take power from the LGBT community. Except that's not its actual origin. The Q slur originates from a 16th century German word meaning oblique or perverse, and it finds its roots in the English language as a term to mean strange and odd. It also has a third-person usage, which means something that has been ruined. You may actually remember the word's proper usage from The Nightmare Before Christmas, of all things.
What's this? In here, they've got a little tree. How queer! And who would ever think?
The usage of it to refer to an LGBT person is an informal use, like when people use literally as a form of hyperbole. The word is not a kind word, objectively. It has never been, and it never will be. And the belief that the term originates as an LGBT term is not only wrong, it's a dangerous precedent to set for modern young people who haven't read up on the actual history of language. The Q slur has more in common with the neo-Nazi pejorative degenerate than it does anything else. But isn't its history as an LGBT term important to consider? No, Billy, it really isn't. Why not? For the same reason that the crows in Dumbo are looked down on today. Even if we accepted the premise that the Q slur was originally a point of LGBT pride with no other history behind it, that wouldn't be the win card so many people think it is, because guess what else was a point of pride for LGBT people?
I'm just a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania.
Rocky Horror Picture Show was a fucking galling film released in 1975 that took every trans misogynistic trope possible, rolled them into a single character that then rapes two people and grooms another to be a sex slave, and somehow, beyond all reason, this has become a huge piece of LGBT culture, applauded and almost never spoken out against. Very rarely does someone speak out against it, at which point a lot of other LGBT people will dogpile on those people for daring to question a shitty portion of LGBT culture as if we're somehow exempt from the same levels of basic human decency that other people are. Problems like this are all over the LGBT community, with properties and people who would be considered brazenly offensive and gross in any other demographic held up and applauded as icons. Rocky Horror Picture Show is just the most notable example on a very long list of extremely problematic faves. The existence of TERFs and true scum also indicate that LGBT people are more than capable of being garbage humans, especially to each other, so the completely myopic view of these things is almost expected. Rocky Horror is considered a big part of gay culture, and so the fact that it's almost a minstrel show depiction of trans people isn't important to a lot of its fans because, not my problem. So while people might like to make the claim that LGBT people in the 60s used to call themselves the Q slur, this isn't exactly winning the argument, because all you're telling me is that the gay community of the 60s was extremely problematic. Hey guys, guess what? One of the N-words appears in Martin Luther King's letter to Birmingham jail. That doesn't mean you should start running out and calling people that. If this letter was written today, the word would not fucking be there, because we've long since realized that it never should have been used in the first fucking place, because that's how the evolution of cultural enlightenment actually works. It was always unacceptable, and the fact that our parents did it anyway is a bad mark on them. But hasn't the Q slur been reclaimed? Like the other N-word was? Billy, that's not the same thing. Why? Because nobody is actually dumb enough to try and use the N-word in a civilized conversation. An uncommon but persistent defense of the adoption of the Q slur is to draw comparison to the reclamation of the N-word by black people, but reclamation and adoption are two very different things. Despite the long-standing reputation that black people can use the N-word and white people can't, in reality, nobody can really use it because it's still recognized as a slur. It doesn't matter what color your skin is, if you use it, you're still gonna get funny looks, you're still still going to be asked to leave public places, you're still going to be treated about the same way as if you publicly uttered any other vulgarity, and you're still going to be laughed at if you're pathetic enough to complain about that. You wouldn't stand up and scream fuck in the middle of a restaurant, and the same rule applies there. Nobody pushes for the adoption of the N-word. Nobody tries to rebrand people of color as the N-word community. Nobody gets bitchy if someone else doesn't want the word uttered in their presence. While someone may use it to refer to themselves, they would never be so stupid as to use it to refer to another. It is an antagonistic word and is treated as such. The Q slur is unfortunately not afforded the same level of restraint. People treat reclamation as if it's some kind of magical society changer, as if they're the Supreme Court of language. When people fill my ear about the fact that the Q slur is being reclaimed as a term by the LGBT community, all I can really wonder is when this actually happened, because it seems to be an extremely contentious topic because the word has a harmful and deadly legacy. People love to talk about the LGBT community of the 60s, but what about the people who were beaten and killed by others while having it screamed at them? What about the people who've experienced the harsh truth of being called that slur and are quite frankly disgusted that some idiot kids would have the nerve to just declare that everything's okay now? It's time to come back to what I was talking about earlier. It's not just that people are using it to refer to themselves. That would be a non-issue, but instead there's a big push to use the Q slur as an umbrella term for the LGBT community, regardless of that community's actual feelings on the matter. And speaking as someone in the LGBT community, no. No. Fuck no. Are you fucking kidding me? No. Putting aside the fact that this is, as I've established, a derogatory term meant to describe something as a strange other and has a violent and hateful legacy attached to it, the LGBT community already has an umbrella term. LGBTQIA+. This term, while indeed murder on the vocal cord, serves the job of an umbrella term much better by clearly conveying everything it's meant to convey: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, asexual / aromantic, and everything else. The everything else at this point being pansexual and non-binary people. LGBTQIA+, or the acronym as it's come to be known, isn't perfect. Not only is it awkward to say, leading many to shorten it to just LGBT, it's a mess of redundancies and strange decisions, like questioning getting its own letter while pansexual and non-binary people are shunted into the plus. Those should be flipped around, or perhaps just take out the stupid plus and add the P in the end. But it does something that no other umbrella term has ever bothered to do. It's inclusive. It's a mess, but like any acronym, it can be adjusted. Queer, on the other hand, is an obfuscating term. It strips out the nuance of non-straight identities and waters them down into an amorphous gray sludge. And when you're trying to apply that to everybody, well, imagine taking the vast array of pride flags and replacing them all with a single brown square. That's what queer does to people's identities. And that's not helpful because everyone experiences oppression differently. Bisexual people can get shit from gay people and called deceitful. Trans people get shit from both of them and called mentally ill. Asexual people get shit from literally fucking everybody for no good reason whatsoever. Non-binary people are still being expected to prove they exist, with both TERFs and True Scum constantly giving them shit, again for no good reason whatsoever. And now we're grinding just a little more shit into everyone's eyes by expecting them to adopt a new identity that is explicitly designed to obfuscate things and reduce people's identities down to a vague, meaningless non-word. Nobody is ever helped by being covered with a sheet, and I say no. I thoroughly reject the notion that this term should be adopted as an umbrella term for an extremely diverse set of people with vastly different experiences, needs, and concerns. We have enough problems to deal with when the government tries to erase our identities. We don't need to be erasing each other's identities as well. Apply it to yourself if you feel so inclined, but if you insist on using it to describe others, using it as an umbrella term, calling LGBT characters queer characters, or using stupid fucking terms like queer studies, or start calling people who don't want to be associated with a slur nasty names and start making up nonsense about it being a TERF dog whistle, then you can go eat 1,000 prickly dicks right in the 9th circle of hell where you fucking belong, you jackass.